and boys and girls and everything in between. Welcome to the show. It's kind of a nice time to introduce my friends and co-hosts, Kurt from American Time Machine and Divulgence podcast, Jordan. What's up, Jordan? How you doing, bro?
Hey, brother.
Yeah, this is kind of like a co-effort. You know what I'm saying? And we're talking a bit about magic. I added a K. I hope that's what you meant. I wasn't sure because I got the call. I was like, okay, we're going to talk about magic. And my first thought went to cult organizations, which is not magic, as Jordan so eloquently pointed out. There are very different things. But so much of our understanding of magic comes from these organizations. And a big one is the OTO. And this is a symbol that we see in Thelema and the OTO with the eye of, is it Horus or Ra? I forget which direction matters. Is that Horus or Ra?
Is there two different? Is there?
Yeah,
I'm only familiar with the Eye of Horus.
So the Eye of Ra is this direction. Okay, and Eye of
Eye of
Horus
Ra. There we go.
is that direction, right? So that's the way it works.
Yeah,
this is
there we
the
go.
eye. Yeah, so I have Horus, and you got a dove of peace, and there's this sort of goblet with a Eucharistic communion wafer-looking thing in the bushes. I mean, there's a lot more going on as well, but also
So
the dove of peace is aiming
where
down.
did you find? Sorry, Xirtus. Where did you find this logo?
So this is one of the main logos. This is the Laman.
Oh, the Ordo Templi Orientis. Okay,
right. And
is
so
is that one of Crowley's groups?
So it was significantly important to Crowley. He was a member and he left the OTO.
Okay.
I mean, he took it over basically, and then he started pushing for them to do more.
He based a lot of this stuff on their stuff, I think.
They were a Gnostic group of Christians that prayed for channeling angels. And originally it was intended to be modeled after or associated with European Freemasonry. And Freemasonry is a whole other bag of worms we could get into, talking about the idea of the occult, which is the occult is also different than magic. Occult groups, occult, that has to do with secrecy, right? Not necessarily to do with magic itself. But before we get into that, what do you guys think about this conversation? What do you think about magic, occult? What do you think about these words and differences?
Anything, Jordan? I'll let you go.
Well, I think, honestly, instead of jumping into a bunch of stuff, I think if we're going to be, because I think me and Kurt and Xirtus, we want to kind of do a bunch of episodes to break down.
Bernie is available. Bernie, I love you. Hold on. Here, let me send you the link as quickly as possible. How about that? Sorry. This is very impromptu, Bernie, and I'm glad we're doing it. I'll send it to you right now on Twitter. How about that?
An alchemist won't hurt.
Yeah. Keep going. What are you saying?
Well, I think we need to just back it up and kind of define some of these definitions. So, I mean, like I was saying in the pre-show, Kurt mentioned that we're talking about the occult, but we're actually talking about magic. And he said, well, it's the same thing, or it's very similar, which, yeah, there's a lot of related topics and concepts and stuff, but they're two completely different fields of study, two completely different concepts. So I think we just got to keep that in mind. And I mean, I think it'd be good to define some of this stuff as we go along. I mean, occult kind of has could have a pretty broad definition, right? I mean, could have to do with esoteric stuff. I mean, when people think of occult, they think of cult right away because obviously the words are very similar, but I mean, there's a lot of cult related stuff that can be considered occultic.
Yeah, cult classics though or not, right? Movies can be cult classics. We don't use the
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, in that sense. I mean, in the sense of a cult.
Some people sacrifice themselves to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but not everybody, right?
Yeah, but I mean, occultism goes back very far. Have you actually, just on that point, have any of you guys seen that new Christian Bale movie, Pale Blue Eye? They get into a lot of really old school occultic stuff. It's pretty interesting, actually. Some old occultic collections and books and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, what does Kurt? I mean, when you think of the word occult, what do you think of, and what are some things you think of, and what are some things that come to your mind? What does occult mean to you?
Now that you mention it that way, I guess a good way of putting it is that a lot of people would think magic lies under the category of the occult. Would that be fair to say? Like, occult could branch off into a lot of different meanings, and like you do associate it with secrecy and a certain sense of, I guess, bondage. Like there's a lot of occult groups and organizations. Like one would be Freemasonry, but I wouldn't necessarily think that specifically magical concepts would be hidden within Freemasonry. Although I don't know, because I don't know the organization that well. Yeah.
You've seen this quote from Arthur C. Clarke: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yes, that's a good one. That's a good one. I actually have that on. Yeah, I got that on the Word document I have open right now. Actually, that's funny.
There you go.
That's a
So
good one.
magic,
I like that quote.
So knowledge is power. Magic is esoteric knowledge. So it's power others don't have.
Yes, and I was thinking about this today. I'm glad that I thought about it today, since we just did this last minute. But I mean, magic has a lot to do with perception, and like you said, essentially who can attain it and who can't. I mean, when I think of magic, sometimes I think of like the way computers and circuit boards and a lot of different electronics and whatnot work. I see that as magic. I mean, if you were to go back in time and put this kind of stuff in front of people's faces, I think they would say it's magic too. I mean, there's obviously the classic. I think when people think of magic, they just get drummed down right away into like Merlin and Gandalf and wizards hats and wizardry and all that, and wands and stuff, which is fine. But I think magic takes on a whole larger atmosphere and has a larger landscape than just the wizard's hat and the wand and kind of the Harry Potter route with spells and whatnot. So, I mean, technology, I mean, it can be seen as a form of magic. I think it has a big reliance on who's perceiving it and how they're perceiving it. And yeah, I mean, that's just part of the thought that I was having earlier today anyways.
I mean, it's funny because what we decide also as magic is often the idea of the illusion. So half of it is what's really going on. Arthur C. Clarke is talking about how, you know, someone looks at this enchanted rock and doesn't understand that there's a lot more going on. There's radio waves and there's lights and there's millions of pixels of red, green, blue, but it's making this face, right? That is magic because it's the secret knowledge, but also there's this illusion. There's the idea of the magic trick, right? So
exactly,
magic trick is important. A lot of people who are into magic, like in England, there's the Royal Society of Magicians, and they're very, very interesting group. The Magic Circle, is that right? Is that the correct group? The International Brotherhood of Magicians, is that right? There's one. So there's a scientific club, and there's a Royal Society of Magicians. I'm trying to find the Royal Society of Magic Illusion. What is it? I forget, but there's these secret clubs.
They're not even that secret. Arrested Development and the group that Job is associated with.
Right, totally. I mean, but that is the thing, that they do have the Royal Society, the Decline of Magic. I mean, the Royal Society played
the Alliance of Magicians.
If you look, okay, how about King James Ring, Magic Ring? The Truth About Solomon's Magic Ring. So he outlawed magic, forced witches to fast in order to create tsunamis to destroy the Spanish Armada. Accordingly, created the feast of, is it the Christmas feast or the Thanksgiving feast? The Thanksgiving feast and the days of humiliation are all this wizard and witch warlock King James. And King James has this crazy ring. Can I find the ring? Where is the picture?
Is this a ring like that you wear, or like a ring of like a group, like a ring of people?
Yeah, he had a magic ring he wore on his finger, Solomon's ring, and so does Muhammad. And so this is the ring of power kind of idea. In the Chronicles of Prydain and in Black Cauldron, the idea of a sixth finger and a magic ring is created. And often they have the lamen or layman, which is this magical talisman, not too different from the OTO symbol that we looked at earlier, right? Or not too different from any of these things, that they're supposed to have an esoteric gestalt that means something. But these international IBM, International Brotherhood of Magicians, there are a lot of these groups that, I mean, there's Mercury, right? Hermes, Nike with his shoes and the Phrygian cap. So these groups are, they focus on the idea, hey, magic's just a trick. Don't really worry about it. It's just an illusion. But that's part of keeping the secret of how things really work. And that's why only some people understand how things work. Computers are more and more this way. The fact that you move your finger and it just does this, you don't understand that there's pixels and code going on. That is all illusion. And so I think that's important. It's not just that there's technology, it's also that it has to be hidden and disguised with something that's untrue.
Yeah, kind of. As far as this topic, I guess we can differentiate magic with a C and magic with a CK, because I think a lot of this is like we're talking about more illusionary tricks with just the C, I guess. That's what I guess we associate with it. So with magic with a CK, we're actually, I think that's more geared towards understanding the true essence of reality, and the true essence of reality isn't the mainstream take on it. I think that's that's my conception in my brain. I mean, I think, I don't know, and that's the rough part. And I mentioned this pre-show, is that it's hard to have a solid definition of what magic truly is, because
Exactly.
when we get on these topics, well, we start to explore different figures in different societies that had all of their own secrets and all of their takes on how they conducted magic. So it's hard to find a central authority to extract a lot of knowledge from. So what I mentioned to Xirtus is one of the oldest examples of a really of a group of people that might have done ceremonial magic. Well, they might have been shamans of local tribes or villages, what have you. But it's hard to necessarily group them into one set of people, I guess.
And we have a romanticization of this idea. So because they're not Catholic, the Druids must have been good. You know, they must have been vegetarians. They must have had equality. No, none of this is true. Esoteric, secret societies. Where do you think the Scottish Rite got their organizational skills? You know, they came from the Knights Templar to Scotland, and then they joined in with these local secret societies. So there's a way that things have always worked. Elders were more than just elders. Hierarchy, patriarchy, whatever words you need to hear. Druids weren't necessarily heroes, and they weren't necessarily super fond of nature the way people think they are either. This idea that just because they lived in nature that they were super fond of the Welsh, the Picts, I mean, people that came before them and then were replaced by the Druids, it seems to me, are probably more likely to be. But they did practice ceremonial magic. And that's something that, you know, when you think of magic with a K, magic with a K redirects to ceremonial magic, Crowley's idea of ritual magic. But this isn't that he created it. This isn't that he created it at all. He's actually just trying to explain why people do these rituals. And if you go to the Freemasons, for instance, let me see if I can show you a Freemasonry play or something like that. You know, essentially everything they do, it's very ritualistic, but it's also very theatrical. So you go through a ritual. A ceremonial magic is a ritual, right? Thomas from Paranoid American was recently talking about the magical ritual of Fantasia. So Walt Disney created Fantasia, and one of the hypotheses for the creation of Fantasia, if you've seen Fantasia, it's this crazy movie that brings to life these characters and really elevates Mickey Mouse. It gives him pupils, and the entire movie is a ritual. It is a ceremonial movie. Ceremonial magic ritual that goes on, even to the point that rituals are performed by the characters. But first, starting out with the vibrations and tones, Fantasia Symphony, they show these abstract patterns and colors, and then they go into actual stories from mythology. And the finalization is this realizes the Disney experience, and it creates this immortalization of Disney for centuries, because after that, Disney is no longer just, you know, this simple cartoon. Now it's created a real world. It's created the Disney world. It's created this Disney universe. It's manifested these characters and these sigils. It's made them memorable in the hearts of so many that will tell them to their children, that it's essentially made them immortal. This is a kind of subtle magic, and this is the kind of practice that was popular in the early 20th century, late 19th century. Right? This is the kind of thing that Aleister Crowley did, and what Freemasons do, that they'll dress up in these outfits. They'll remember the positions a man stood in a room. They'll go in the flow using all material, wearing the same maybe wearing a cape that belonged to the person that they keep in the lodge. It's like hundreds of years old, in order that hopefully the material ceremony will somehow rekindle some of the energies, or due to the energies, what the material forced the energies to do in the past, and they'll be able to connect with it.
So ceremonial magic, just to be clear, if I am correct, is that, oh, you got it right there. So it's kind of your typical, just what it sounds like, ceremonial rituals. You know, you kind of have your, like, when I think of ceremonial, I think of like the Eyes Wide Shut scene where they're going around in the circle and you have Red Cloak banging his staff on the red carpet and all that. So
well, there are definitely that's why I mentioned earlier the idea of theatrical, because there are some elements which are very theatrical, but I think you can also associate that with the idea that it is a very theatrical group, right? These are usually actors, artists that are involved with it. I don't think the ceremony has to be as theatrical as they make it. Really, what needs to happen, according to the OTO, is that there's a pentagram or a septagram with a hexagram and a pentagram inside of it, and a person is inside of that, surrounded in brick dust and salt. I don't know if I can show a picture of the ritual, because it's essentially then sexual acts are performed. I don't know how far I should go with the explanation, but somebody's outside of the square and their head is inside of the square performing the sexual acts. So the idea is to open this tantric portal that requires two persons, and then also that it's trapped inside of a Solomonic square. Solomon Square magic.
What is that? Let's get into that a little bit.
So Solomon squares are the idea of trapping something inside. And first off, you're using a layman again. So it's these mathematical sigils. So I find that very interesting, that the idea of magic is connected so much with math and science. It seems like radio or energy, or that they're remembering something about the past. But this is essentially, I've said before, a spaceship, right? Because the idea is you stand in the center, even northeast, south, and west around you, or rather, you're in the triangle, and something is brought into the center ring. I mean, there's several ways that this happens. If you do it in the center, then something is manifested and invoked into you. If you do it in the triangle, you're the witness, and your job is to chronicle what happens, what you see inside of the Aurora Borealis. So it depends on your goal, but this is often used to communicate with other worlds, allegedly, right, by medians. And this is what supposedly Solomon used himself. And Solomon created, we think of Solomon as the writer of Ecclesiastes in the Bible.
Yeah, it's important to mention how much these subjects that the Jewish alphabet is used, or Hebrew.
Yeah, but what's interesting about this to me is, so if you think about how Hebrew didn't exist for so many centuries, especially even if it did, it was erased and it was replaced in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. So really you're using Arabic script and Arabic numerals, right? And so Arabic symbology, Arabic lexicon. But the idea that every culture is saving some lost bit of Tartaria. So you have one group that's saving the number system or some sort of lexicon that's associated with hexadecimal code, and another group that's saving architecture, right? They know how to build certain things, but they don't know how to install the systems that work them. And they're going off in boats, two different directions from Krakatoa. So I think that's maybe what's going on here with the Kabbalah and Gematria, is that it's just they're storing, some part of the lost civilization. Regardless, Solomon did produce Goetia. So beyond the fact that he is known for being the king, he also had a ring. He went to an all silent place and used the acoustics of demons, which he was able to control in order to build the temple, right? And then from there also wrote the books on the lesser keys and the greater keys of Solomon, supposedly, which are the names of the different choirs of angels. Some people suggest that those were written way later, but that just kind of flamencos out, right? The idea that the chronologies changed. Interestingly enough, Joseph Smith had a similar magic square found in his pocket.
This is Joseph Smith of the Mormons?
Right, when he was murdered. Let me type in.
Murdered? Whoa.
Yeah, Joseph Smith was thrown out of a window, but this is the coin that was in
Jesus,
his
sounds like a
pocket
JFK
and
legend.
shot. Yeah, some pretty crazy stuff, but you know, there's a lot of context for Joseph Smith, but also his interest in magic is important because Christian groups like the OTO, these are Gnostic groups. And you know, Islam has its own flavor of magic, but right now the witch trials are most common there in places where Muslims live. In Africa, for instance, they have witch trials constantly right now. So the other thing is magic squares were banned under King James, who had Solomon's ring. And these magic squares were used by midwives. So midwives who were also brewers would make these ceramic plates and they would use them and break them with water thrown on them over women to help them give birth. And there's all sorts of references to British women using these magic squares. And then that came over to America. And it's around the same time. So as people were starting to be kicked out for being hyper Christian, as you hear, they don't tell you that so many people left because they were also pagan. There are lots of old folk traditions that made their way out right at the time that they were being banned in Britain to the Americas, and magic made its way here as well. Let me get to the Rosicrucians, you know, the Gnostic Rosicrucians in America. Basically, they planned on, and we've talked about Nova Atlantis, the idea of building a new Atlantis in the Western Hemisphere. And they get there and they find it's already there. And the Bible's floated up on the shore and they've built the perfect society. And so this is the metaphor for the Rosicrucians, that by the time the colonialists get there, the Rosicrucians will have already built up in the Americas. And so they built their magical temples like in San Jose. Rosicrucians, San Jose, California. And so they're an occult group, right? But I mean, the magic ceremonies that they're practicing are very scientific. For instance, they have a solar observatory. What do you call that thing with the stars? Like a planetarium? They have a planetarium and they do updates on the planetarium. If you see this, these are the statues of, is it Ra? I forget the name of the ram god. As you're on your way in front of the hippo goddess. And as you go inside, there's all sorts of crazy art. And then you get into a room where there's an actual mummy and they've got all of these things from Egypt that they've taken. And it's just in San Jose in California.
Huh, that's worth taking note of for sure. I want to springboard that potentially. It's been discussed. I love people like whoever the guy that does the show. Oh, fuck, what is it? Midnight Gospel. Yeah. Whoever did that. I think his name was Trevor or Terrence, something, whatever. But yeah, he had some really interesting podcasts. And basically, he's one subject that was brought up during one of them is that
Duncan Trussell?
Yeah, Trussell, Duncan Trussell. That's what his name was. One subject that was brought up was that a lot of magic or magical forces can be traced back to a lot of standardized religion, or at least the religion that we see now that is now standardized. If you look far enough and you look between the lines, well, you could treat a lot of religious texts basically as magical tomes because they have, well, withstood the test of time, but they've been commercialized to a degree where we've been separated from their true understanding. So it's worth, now that ever since I heard that, I do approach religious texts with a brand new view on life and a view of the text themselves. And translating to that on some of Xirtus' shows, yeah.
Xirtus, man. Learn the name.
We were introduced to some Islamic temples and some of the artwork that goes into the top of Islamic temples. And if you look at them, they are absolutely, phenomenal. And you can only think like, wow, this is like some sort of product of magic, just because of how crazy and three-dimensional some of the ceiling artwork is. And it's not like, it's actually like three-dimensional. Like they like carved out or made pillars or whatever and to make, these are just tremendous
Arabesque. You can say it. I think it's a funny word though. Arabesque, right? Arabesque. Like, so it's very Arabesque, really, isn't
it? Arabesque,
It's quite Arabesque, really. I mean,
no, I think
really talk about how lazy Brandy makes British people. It's Arabesque. Yes. Uh-huh. I mean, but they are interesting because they're not just beautiful. they're not allowed to make pictures of people. So that's interesting. And where are they setting up for some transhumanist society that will replace them, or new faces? What's the deal? Why are you blowing faces off buildings? But also, because they're not supposed to imitate God, or if they're supposed to try, they have to be all encompassing. God is not in the image of man. Man is in the image of God. So we can't just make a picture of God as a man, right? We have to think about all the encompassing nature of what it is that is God in the universe. So these pictures are far more interesting, I think, because they really do speak to a magical level. And the fact that they think geometry is so important. Bernie's joining us. What's up, Bernie? How you doing, bro? Oh, pop in and out. Hey, Brittany's here. 3 superb shows in one day. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brittany.
Dude, let's go back to that comment that I checked the chat. I threw a comment in there for you to pull up. You got to give me the ability to pull comments back up again.
Oof. Yeah, we should get you in here. Where's the thing? Where do I go? How far up is it?
1:04 a.m. from Ann Gaynor about the Super Bowl ritual scene in Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh yeah, like it was weird.
See that. I want to see that. Pull that up.
Well, like there was the whole controversy. Don't want to get too far off topic, but like with the imagery of Sam Smith and his performance, and then Rihanna decided to wear like all red too. There's been
oh my god, her outfit was ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like a blood clot. It was like, I get it, okay.
Wait,
Kids are dying.
Let's see this I want to see this Eyes Wide Shut scene. Let's not get off track.
Well, what is the part that they mean? The Eyes Wide Shut scene reminded them of Super Bowl. I mean, Super Bowl in general does.
What is that?
Look up pictures of the halftime show.
Bro. I guess because she wears, because the red. I get what you're saying. Yeah, and then they were wearing white.
She's like red cloak.
I get it, kind of. I don't know. I just saw like red blood cell, white blood cell, Johnny osmosis. 30% of youngsters are dying, and it's not because it's because they're not getting vaccinated or wearing their masks, and that's what that's what it is, man. I don't know. And then so maybe, but the Eyes Wide Shut thing, the red all the time. Red seems to come up. Red they like to associate with the devil, but also red's like the wedding dress color of China. It's the ancient color of desire and passion, right? So I wonder also about our cultural understandings of evil or something.
Well, the infrared, it does seem to be the demonic spectrum compared to ultraviolet that seems to be the more natural aura and life force.
Higher aura versus lower aura. So there's like McDonald's, for instance, the colors of McDonald's, the logo. It's like designed so that you're driving in the middle of the night and you see the base colors. These like the low spectrum infrared. It's like the first colors that you see in the band. So you'll be starved, crazed, and driving, and you're just like, oh, okay. I mean, it seems like that's a pretty brilliant trick. The colors that stick out. There's some groups I wanted to pull up also because we're talking about the Gnostics, and we talked about the Mormons and how they kind of are a Gnostic group, but also the Muslims are a Gnostic group. There's the where did I put it? Adonism, Neo-Paganism from Franz Sattler, Dinian Muin, which is the Fairman, which is like a Welsh Pictus. That was a better, if you're looking for a better Druidism, I'll say probably look into this one. But there's a couple I wanted to point out. The Order of the Nine Angles. So when you think about magic, first let's go Anton LaVey, because
I got
a lot of.
Oh, sorry. I got 3 points I want to bring up at some point, and we can scatter them out.
No, if you want to do it now, or any of them, speak.
Do it, dog. Let's hear him.
All right. So one thing I think is worth mentioning, we couldn't do the show without mentioning Crowley, and we mentioned him already, or Crowley, however you want to say it. And I think, me and Jordan both agreed, like, we didn't want to talk about Crowley too much because there's different, he's volatile as a character and as a historical character too, I would say. And I think it's too hard to separate Crowley just being this jester or maybe just potentially an asshole that's just trolling everybody with actual real genuine knowledge or genuine information about what secrets are hidden out there. Let's just put it that way.
Jordan got us William Ramsey at one point to interview, and Ramsey's got some pretty good, interesting information.
Yeah,
We
I'd
also
love to bring him on. So if we're gonna talk Crowley, we should definitely bring him on. But
right.
Mm.
I would just say
Bruce-
that Crowley did, though, go to a Puritan school and was starve crazed and was dying. And he moved in with his uncle, and he started getting healthier because he was allowed to drink brandy and things. And he realized, wow, you mean all these sacrifices I'm making as a Puritan aren't helping my body? And
Right.
I'll be healthier if I sin. And I think that was the start of a lot of questions for what a sin really was for Crowley. But he wasn't really a Satanist. We always call him a Satanist. And I think that's kind of the thing. People associate magic with Satanism. They associate
Right.
Anton LaVey immediately. And that's that's what comes later. That comes because of Crowley, for sure. But not because Crowley's a Satanist. It's because he's a magician who said, I don't have to just pray to the angels you like. You know, I'm not saying that he's a good guy either, but he wasn't really he was a new age. Like the new age movement comes from Crowley. He wanted to be called Little Miss Sunshine. I mean, not really, but that's what that movie's about.
Yeah, and we
there's
can
just
talk.
one-
Oh, sorry.
I did say call me Sunshine, not Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah.
Just before we get off. Okay, go ahead, man.
Sorry. If we want to talk about a little bit about the Golden Dawn, I think that's a good branch we can go down that's associated. And at one point I want to mention the Sephiroth because I
what's
never
that?
Sephiroth is I can't even fucking explain it, but it's
I
I
have
guess
to get David for that. Sure. Well, these are just the beginning of conversations about magic, but the Sephirot, which
Look at this.
it's associated with being
Sephiroth.
Hebrew, but really the Tiberian also,
Nice.
there's groups of Semitic peoples that existed before the Hebrews that also use the symbol, and also the Chinese
so
have a
it's
symbol
like-
that's very similar.
It's like a tree of life, right?
So
Yeah.
I mean, so
here,
I
wait,
always
what do we
think
got
of
here?
I think of the Star Wars metaphor, right? Because you've got this idea of how do you get to how does Han Solomon get
If
to
you want to pull up
the
my
castle-
screen,
the Kessel Run done in 12 parsecs? You got a screen up? Where is that? Yeah. Oh,
if you want to pull up
there
my
you go.
screen.
There we
Nice.
go.
Tree of
book
life,
is that?
baby. This is Magic, an Occult Primer by David Conway.
Oh, sweet.
nice.
What are they saying about the Sephiroth there? Do they say anything? They calling it the Tree of Life?
No, I haven't read it yet. I remember seeing it, and they refer to it as the Tree of Life. So that's why.
So it's more like I think.
It's a three triangles. Yeah. So you go ahead. You know more about it than me.
Well, I just say it's like multiple dimensions of the metaphysical reality. So there's different parts of reality. Let me see if I can find each one of these. The Malkut is the base. The 10th Sephirot sits at the bottom of the tree beside Yesod, has a symbol of the bride, which relates to the sphere of the Teferet,
Yeah, here we
symbolized
go.
by the
Yeah,
bridegroom.
Malkut.
And so
Yeah.
each one of these has these kind of metaphorical stases of being, which are they're related to human experience, but they actually have deeper, kind of the way Schrodinger talks about cats, and you can imagine that these connect to each other through Teferet. Hod connects to Netzah through Teferet or through Yesod. And there's ways that events happen because of other events. There's ways you can predict how certain children will be born to certain kinds of people. And this also leads to how sounds emanate. There's certain kinds of sounds. People think of Kiki and Boba, right? Kiki, Boba, sounds. If you look at these two shapes, which one's Kiki and which one's Boba? Did you know you're not the only one who knew that? That you immediately know that that's Kiki and that's Boba?
Kiki is left, Boba is right.
Yeah, you know that. Everybody knows that. Why? Why do you know that? Because it's a sound wave. Why do you know that?
K is spiky and B is bubbly.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. I've never seen this before.
Did you know that? I'm sorry if I ruined it for you, but would you have said that was Kiki and Boba in that way? Who would you
Like
have
if
named
I were to
Kiki?
guess, if I were to ask to guess,
Yeah.
yeah, I probably would have said that the blobby looking one was Boba or whatever.
It
Boba.
seems like they've asked people all over the world, in Africa, Australia, in the rainforest. and these sounds actually people associate with certain things. And so these sounds return, names return, symbols return, history repeats itself, that sort of thing. And so the Kabbalah is kind of based on the idea of using the Sephirot as a map. And so I always think of, can I type in Star Wars Sephirot? I made an episode of Star Wars kind of explaining why Star Wars is about. Is it going to work? Can I find anything better than that? That's the worst. How am I going to? Maybe I can
Just on a side note, the
Yeah.
person that commented on the Super Bowl and Eyes Wide Shut, I found some pictures where they have some of the dancers in purple surrounding her, and it looks a lot like the scene in Eyes Wide Shut. It's pretty cool.
I'll just type Star. I'll just look at Han Solo, because Han Solo is Solomon, right? And so this idea that he's the Solomon the Wise, and he has to do the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, meaning he has to build the temple. In order to build the temple in less than 12 parsecs, it's not a question of going faster necessarily, because you're going light speed, and it's a question of distance. And how can you do a distance? The Kessel Run is a distance. It's a 12 parsecs. Parsecs are a distance. So how do you complete a distance in less distance? And the answer is the Sephiroth, because you are going through the asteroid belt. Obviously, you can't go directly. So you have to go around all the things, right? So Han Solomon, he's able to direct the Millennium Falcon, which is what, like a phoenix, like directly around the Sephiroth. So that's kind of the metaphor for Star Wars for this. That is what he's doing. That's what the warp drive is for.
Yeah, perfect springboard. I think a great point in here is that once you start exploring these ideas, I didn't even read about them for very long, but you immediately start seeing a lot of cultural references that you never seen before. Like a local bar in my town that's attached to the firehouse, it's called the Undines, and I never heard that word in my life. I was like, Undines, what the fuck does that mean? Well, that's actually in the Book of the Golden Dawn, and it's supposed to be, it has something to do with what they call elementals. So that's an example. Sephiroth is used as like the final boss, I think, of the Kingdom Hearts game. But if you really dig into it, there's like 10 parts of the Sephiroth or Sephiroth, however you want to say it, and they all you could see like, oh, those all sound like boss video game characters. There's a lot you could do on there. And one other point I think we should touch on before maybe by the end of the show is like actually getting into an example of maybe like advanced ritual magic and like what it actually entails, because I think that's the most like mystical side of like foreign side of it.
Ceremonial magic.
Yeah, I mean, so we could look at some of, first off, let's look at a couple modern examples. I was going to say earlier, the Order of the Nine Angles, they practice traditional magic, but also they were associated with neo-Nazism, and there was connections to Ace of Base, and there's a couple other examples of these. This is a United Kingdom group. There's another one, the Temple of Black Light, which was a Swedish chaos Gnostic Satanism, current 218, the MLO. The Order of the Black Light is the other. Temple of the Black Light is the other way. The Misanthropic Luciferian Order. A bunch of people got sacrificed in Sweden. Long story short, but rituals have been done, and not all of them are by these evil groups. A lot of these ceremonial magical groups are super normal.
If you're sacrificing people, you're just a little bit evil. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just meant like though.
Just a little bit there, Bernie.
Pentagon levitation. So let's talk about a magic ritual from the 60s. Let's bring it back. Okay, so in the 1960s, Abby Hoffman from the Yippies got a bunch of people together to hold hands around the Pentagon in order to levitate the Pentagon. And as far as the word goes, now apparently it wasn't really to levitate the Pentagon. It was to levitate some evil spell that was around the Pentagon, like some bad aura. But the word got out further and further to people that they were going to levitate the Pentagon. He's like, that's good enough. If people believe that, it's the power of belief. Maybe we will levitate the Pentagon. But the original intention was really just to de-spook the Pentagon. And what it did was it got the entire country surrounding, there was all these soldiers. There's all these crazy, where's the picture? Flower gun. Can I find it? Dude putting a flower at the edge of the gun.
One university riot that happened.
4 dead in Ohio. When people mention Ohio, the first thing I think about is the riots in Ohio. The 4 dead in Ohio is a song I had to learn in guitar class. But the stories of what was going on at the time. So these rituals, though, so levitating the Pentagon, getting people involved in that, pray against Trump, spiritual advisor, pray against president's opponents, suggest they're operating sorcery witchcraft. Now let's type in Trump, spell against Trump. Witches cast mass spell, BBC against Donald Trump. So, I mean, this is all going on all the time, and it's not really that weird or out of the ordinary. This was weird. There were some really horrible things that happened with this. Actually, dogs were murdered, but in general,
Shit.
not all of these involve sacrifices. So let's get into that. Maybe I'm going to ask Bernie, why do you think it is that the
Fucking
homunculi?
magic back there, Bernie.
Yeah,
Right?
you know, just as an expert in
Oh,
homunculi,
magical. Fucking magical, eh?
2
Love
meter
it.
tall leprechaun over
Fucking
here.
love
So,
that magic there, Bernie.
so if you're gonna make a homunculi, why are you putting blood and all these things in it? What's going on with magic that it requires sex, tantra, salt baths, and all
Sacrifice
this?
and a bit of your original being, I think, is the purpose behind that. And I have yet to actually try to make a homunculi, as apparently one of the ingredients is semen, and just not down with that. Although
Buddy,
that
it's
said,
natural.
I've got an offer. If someone wants to donate
Oh
me
my
$1
God.
million, I will whack off into a jar on OnlyFans
On
and attempt to make a real
onlyalchemist.com, right.
homunculi. But I ain't doing it for less than $1 million.
God, but the thing is, other people are. And so here's the question. Why is this happening? Why do you need to do this? What is the point of Maria Abramovich and spirit cooking? Why does that exist? Why can't you do
I
magic
wanted to
without that?
bring up Madam Helena Blavatsky and Abramovich, and just maybe bring up some other pertinent people in magic other than Crowley, because obviously you hear his name will come up. But there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, Blavatsky's important.
And
what do you want to
she
say
was,
about
I read about
Theosophy?
her, and she was very gifted in the poltergeist effect, which is, I think that's when you can make noises kind of travel, kind of like throwing your voice, but like kind of like tapping your fingers, making that sound travel and making it sound like there's ghosts or spirits or whatever haunting you.
Keep going. I'm going to grab a book, but also explain why the Theosophic Society. What is the Theosophic Society? Do you know what this is?
That looks pathetic.
No, I do not actually.
So the Theosophical Society is the organization of Theosophy. Amongst its founders, Helena Blavatsky, a Russian mystic. The Theosophical Society invested heavily in land in England and in India and former colonies. Actually found Krishnamurti, raised him to be the next Messiah. He wasn't super down. So he said there's no end to education. It's not that you read a book, whatever. He basically said, I'm not going to be your Messiah. And in a lot of ways became the self-independent Messiah. So it's kind of like he became what they wanted him to become anyway. So they kind of forced him to become this person. But he was a hyper intelligent child that they had decided was the next ritual. Is they had to take this kid in India and turn him into the next spiritual master, right? And they performed a lot of rituals in India. There's actually an episode of Young Indiana Jones where he plays soccer. He plays soccer with Krishnamurti, which is pretty funny. There he is right there. He's like, let's play cricket. No, let's play baseball.
Nice.
Adorable little thing there. But the Theosophic Society do these rituals. I just want to grab a book really quickly. Maybe you want to talk about, you said Helena Blavatsky, and then you want to talk about Maria Abramovich, or?
Yeah, if you want. I mean,
I'm going to get an Alice Bailey
book. There's so much
for
like that we're going to get into over the course of these magic episodes, but I just thought let's try to bring up a bunch of different interesting stuff, and then along the way we can dissect it. But yeah, that spirit cooking stuff is intense. I'd like to know more about those like Gwen Stefani there. I'd like to know more about these meetings and all these celebrities and higher ups, and what the deal is behind that. And yeah, it's messed up. Some of them seem to be so really into it more than others.
Holy
is
books.
Anyone familiar? Oh, go ahead. What's that?
Said holy books.
Oh.
Andreas got the books.
The holy books.
The holy books.
You pull out some of these books. Okay, so a couple books I recommend. The Magic of Jewels and Charms by G.F. Kuntz, which is a very interesting book. And it talks a bit about the idea of geology and quartz far before. And this was a book that I got from a guy who worked in computer science. It was a solid state physicist. So was interested in why certain kinds of jewels that are important to technology, it's hard to even show you the pages here, but why certain jewels in technology are the same jewels that Solomon had and why certain priests wear those kinds of crystals to this day. An Arab legend concerning the fabled Shamir stone is related by Qazwini in his cosmography. When King Solomon set about building the Temple of Jerusalem, he commanded Satan to dress the stones that were to be used, but the work was performed with such demoniac energy that the people round about complained bitterly of the dreadful noise. To remedy this trouble, Solomon sought the counsel of the leading scribes and also that of the evil spirits known as the Ifrites and the Jinns. None of them, however, were able to help him in this difficulty, but one of them advised him to question an apostate named Sar, who had sometimes had special knowledge of such things. When called for his opinion, he said he knew of a stone that would do the work required, but he did not know where it could be found. Nevertheless, they believed that by a stratagem he could procure possession of it. Thereupon he ordered that an eagle's nest with its eggs should be brought to him, and that a bottle-shaped vessel made of very strong glass. Into that he slipped the eggs, put them back into the nest, and had the eggs replaced where they had been found. When the eagle returned to its nest, it encountered this obstacle. In vain, it struck at the vessel with its claws and beak. After repeated efforts, it flew away, but came back on a second day holding a piece of stone in its beak, which it let fall upon the vessel, breaking the latter into two halves without producing any sound. Upon this, Solomon, who knew the language of the beasts and birds, asked the eagle where it had procured the stone. The bird answered, "O prophet of God, in a mountain in the west called the Samir Mountains." This was the indication enough to the wise king, who had summoned the jinns to his aid, soon had in Jerusalem a plentiful supply of these Shamir stones, which were the work of shaping and polishing the blocks for the temple noiselessly. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, is just like the geology connection there. And then I have a series of books here from Alison Foster Bailey, which are from the Lucis Trust, right? And the Lucis Trust is a UN organization. Well, they did the Great Invocation for the UN, but let's see, there's esoteric psychology, telepathy, and then there's a treatise on white magic, but I have an older copy that's bigger, ironically. Look at the difference here between these two. And there's more, trust me. So when you look at a treatise on white magic, let me see
what does the logo look like?
Oh, it's interesting here.
Oh, okay, never mind, because there's a logo on my book that's okay. It's completely different. Okay.
Right. I don't know, because I didn't think that I was going to be doing this shit, so I didn't pull up anything specifically. But suffice it to say that I'm a Tibetan disciple of a certain degree, and this tells you little, but for all disciples, from the humblest aspiration is to beyond the Christ himself. I live in a physical body like other men on the borders of Tibet, and at times from the exotic point preside over a large group of Tibetan lamas, whereby my other duties permit. You know, the kind of thing here, talking about the importance of the rules for magic. Rule 1, the solar angel collects himself, scatters not his force, but in meditations deep, communicates with his reflections. Rule 2, when the shadow hath responded in meditation deep, the work proceedeth, the lower high light is thrown upward, the greater light illuminates the 3, and the work of the 4 proceedeth. Rule 3, the energy circulates, the point of light, the product of the labors of the 4 waxes and groweth. The myriads gather round its glowing warmth until its light recedes, its fire grows dim, then shall the second sound go forth. Rule 4, sound, light, vibrations, and the form blend and merge, and thus the work is one. It proceedeth under the law, and naught can hinder now the work from going forward. The man breatheth deeply, he concentrates his forces and drives the thought form from him. Rule 5, 3 things engage the solar angel before the sheath created passes downward: the conditions of the waters, the safety of one who thus creates, and the steady contemplation. Thus are the heart, the throat, and the eye, and the allied for triple service. Rule 6, the devas of the lower 4 feel the force. When the eyes open, they are driven forth and lose their masters. Rule 7, the dual forces on the plane whereupon the vital power must be sought are seen. The 2 paths face the solar angel. The poles vibrate. A choice confronts the one who meditates. Rule 8, the Agnosurians respond to the sound. The water ebb and flow. Let the magician guard himself from the drowning at the point where land and water meet. The midway spot, which is neither dry nor wet, must provide the standing place whereupon his feet are set. When water, land, and air meet, there is a place for magic to be wrought. Rule 9, condensation next ensues. The fire and waters meet. The form swells and grows. let the magician set his form upon the proper path. Rule 10, as the waters bathe the form created, they are absorbed and used. The form decreases in its strength. Let the magicians thus continue until the work suffices. Let the outer builders cease their labors then, and let the inner workers enter their cycle. Rule 11, three things the worker with the law must now accomplish. First, ascertain the formula which will confine the lives within the ensphering wall. Next, pronounce the words which will tell them what to do and where to carry that which has been made. And finally, utter forth the mystic phrase which will save him from their work. Rule 12, the web pulsates, it contracts and expands. Let the magician seize the midway point and thus release those prisoners of the planet. Whose note is right and justly tuned to which we made. Rule 13, the magician must recognize the fourth note in his work, the shade of violet they evidence, and thus construct the shadow. When this is so, the shadow closes itself and the 4 becomes 7. Rule 14, the sound swells out. The hour of danger to the soul, courageous draweth near. The waters have not hurt the white creator, and not could drown nor drench him. Danger from fire and flame menaces now, and dimly yet the rising smoke is seen. Let him again, after the cycle of peace, call upon the solar angel. And the final rule, rule 15, the fire approaches the shadow, yet burns it not. The fire sheath is completed. Let the magician chant the words that blend the fire and water. So, an example of a ritual, maybe.
They were pretty words.
It's interesting stuff, these magic rituals and the sigils and all of that. Pinterest has a lot of these different sigils and stuff, and it's like most of them, especially the advanced ones, seem more like circuits and like electrical circuits. And
You're cutting out, Bernie.
it seems
Bernie,
the geometries are just
away.
Oh, we didn't catch any of that, Bernie.
Yeah, it just
Like,
melted.
look at
Everything
that.
melted for a second. Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, I will repeat. It looks more like electrical, circuitry than it does magical symbology. Like this looks like a high-dimensional circuit, and I've had a couple people point out that some of Solomon's keys are LED light kits themselves. So it's just lost high technology.
Right. Let me show you
Which
also.
book is that,
from-
Xirtus?
This is my grandfather's book from school, Mathematical Magic.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's cool. Actually, I just noticed it has some of his notes here, but I was trying to find the one part that was pretty decent. So the cycloid, for instance, I don't know if you can see any of this stuff because it's pretty small here, but it just talks about the symbols that you can memorize, formulas. And if you used to have a slide rule on your tie, this would be your book on magical ways to remember. A cycloid is a number which repeats itself endlessly. For example, if we were to divide 7 into 1, the answer would be 0.142857, and by the way, the ones are crossed out by my grandfather. 2857, etc. A never-ending cycle of the number constantly repeated. This particular cycloid has interesting characteristics. If 142857 is multiplied by a digit from 2 to 6, this product will be a 6-digit number that consists of the cycloid numbers. Below, you will find the product of multiplying 142857 by these various digits. And if you do it backwards, you get the same thing if you divide those numbers, etc. So mathematically, I mean, these seem kind of cute. These are like cute little tricks that you can play, magic tricks, because you can seem really smart. You remember all these crazy numbers, but there's just ways of remembering them because they're patterns, essentially. And those are also what are used to create solid state physics. So when you're talking about how much these sigils look like a circuit board, you're totally right. In fact, let me see if I can find one who's done this. I know, because I know some kids who've done it. I don't know if I can find one, though, but I know people that have actually made circuits using these because it's pretty easy to do. Like, you can actually take a print on top of a piece of paper that you write the pattern, or use a Sharpie is even easier. Use a Sharpie on top of copper plate or a plated piece of silicon with the copper on top of it. And then you can use acid to burn away everything except for the part that's covered with the Sharpie. And then that will be an outline of the sigil. And then from there, you just add contact points. So you can imagine here, you might have capacitors, and you might have transistor repeater, and you might have a quartz crystal or some sort of a semiconductor connected to a processing unit. It could be any number of things you could use this shape for. And it's also interesting because a lot of the time they don't use these shapes. They tend to use Intel silicone wafer. If you look at a silicone wafer, right, you'll notice it doesn't seem a lot like a pentagram. It looks like a city. Apple M2 chip architecture. Let me see if I can go up close. Oh no, that might be it right there. This is such a terrible photo, but you can see it's not a bunch of pentagrams. Is kind of my point. But when you think
more like the Giza Pyramid Plateau.
But when you think about it, at a certain point, when it gets this small, all of a sudden creating pentagrams in the map becomes a lot easier. And that is what happens here. So let's say the GPU core is sending information directly across diagonally through the system cache to the small L2. And the NPU or the Lightning CPU is also getting data directly across from the core GPU, which is processing data and sending off data not to process to the NPU or to a UPU and some other of these, ARM chips. So they do end up looking like Washington, D.C. And it's just a matter of grams. It's a matter of how you draw the maps. It's a matter of how you're looking at it. But of course, anything can be done this way. And there really are routes that make it possible to send information quicker this way. That's another point of the Sephirot, is that you have multiple paths that can emerge. And this is a problem that's happened to Intel because they didn't do that. You're producing this one chip that if there's any problem, you have to throw the whole thing away. They have a lot of, this is why AMD beat Intel, basically, if you ever wondered. Not enough magic.
That's right.
Okay, so why is it associated with evil then? It's not just Anton LaVey. In the 18th century and the 16th century, people started pointing fingers at people who had the ability to use these powers, right? Which trials, they used to burn people who had greenhouses in the wintertime. What's up with that?
They just didn't want the science or that knowledge, the technology getting spread, and they were wiping it out. It was a reset.
Damn.
Thoughts? Do you have any thoughts, anybody? Jordan, Kurt?
It's sorry. There are so many avenues of this conversation that we could go down. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know how deep we want to get because we're going to be wrapping up soon. So, I mean,
oh yeah.
Go ahead, Kurt. If you got something if you want to go into it, get into it.
Well, it's I have no point regarding like the witch trials. Really, I guess. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's hard to separate what was actually going on from the hysteria, I guess, because we only have so much insight when it comes to what was actually documented.
Right.
And what really does get documented. You don't know if, we call things witch hunt because we don't think there's any merit to any guilt. I mean, there might have been. Yeah.
I mean, like obviously those Basque women in the middle of the night were clearly dancing with Baphomet. I mean, why else would they burn 30,000 people and take all their money and land?
That's a very appealing depiction of Baphomet, I must say. Like, he doesn't look evil at all.
He gets down, man. Baphomet, cute. If you type that in, I think you'll find people. I'm not the first.
Oh my god. What is wrong with people?
What?
Come into a Toys R Us near you, buddy.
Time to wrap it up on that note.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong here at all.
The only other contributing thing I might be able to say, I love all these tabs that we brought up, by the way.
Yeah, right.
But I think one of the key concepts, I think, going into this is that reality doesn't necessarily have the essence that we apply to it or that we have applied to it and that our cultural system of indoctrination has taught us. I think that's fundamentally how things end up changing. And I think, maybe once we start to unravel the true nature of realities, eventually it might become part of the indoctrination process. We'll take, for example, the disciplines of psychology. Like, I think a lot of Freudian concepts, a lot of them were very new. It was a very new way of thinking about things. But now that we've have validated them, they could have been seen as being very magical at the time. And I think that shit's wild when we talk about the subconscious and a lot of subconscious, that's unconscious processes. Those are some of the most fascinating and interesting conversations that you can have. And I think they have transitioned into having influences on the art world. And I think there's a lot of we could incorporate a lot of that into any conversation about magic as well, because of how foreign the concepts were at the time. So I think a lot of our understanding of what the potential of magic is, it's very limited. We're taught to think of these things as fictional and outside the realm of science, and we've gotten put so much authority into science that I think it's been a little bit of a fallacy.
It's like fictional or it's evil. It's like either it's so evil it's a horror movie, or don't worry, it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And I think those might actually be very, very false things. So I think there are a lot of different branches, meaningful branches we could take this conversation. We won't really have time for them tonight, but I think
we'll have to get back to it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting also someone asking, why is he holding his hands like Jesus? I mean, because they're not cute, sorry. Because, that is, and he's also, his arms say praxis, right? Which has to do with work. And so say like faith without works is dead kind of a thing. So it's interesting because also when you compare Baphomet and the original idea of the Gnostic Baphomet, there's some people that worship the white Baphomet. And I think it's Esoteric Eddie who had an interview we did that talked about white Baphomet. And it's interesting to me that the symbol, eventually the Knights Templar and the Crusades, and there are people that are being executed in Spain, and the symbol of Baphomet emerges. But there's also a sort of this Baphomet-like Egyptian god that existed before as well. And similar also Hathor, the golden calf at one point used to be a more obvious thing. You knew the golden calf would have been your Baphomet at some point. You would have thought, oh man, golden calf. But these days, golden calf, I mean, you don't really associate it with, we have Wall Street, for instance, has the
false idols.
Right. So false idols are pretty much what has replaced these original symbols. And also the idea of putting energy into an idol. You're taught not to do that. Moses is taught to draw a line against the first idol. So it's interesting how that's been replaced.
Look at our capitalist bull market idol. But the only other thing I would say is that I think a very central point that is important to all of these concepts and anything that you can also incorporate into your own life is realizing how much of certain things are a construct. And I think time itself is one of those things where it's possible that we try to attribute understanding to it, but we actually do not understand the fundamental nature of time itself. And so with enough time, if you're a very patient person, a lot of things can definitely change in your own life, and time can change the fundamental nature of reality. But we've tried our best to measure it, and we have these clocks. We have clocks, and we have a system of time. We have a calendar. But what are the potential weaknesses there? And I think that's one idea that might be worth thinking about when it comes to magical concepts. And tied into that, I recently watched a video, and it was about gravity and about how we've assumed that gravitational pull is a constant. Whereas if you go into different parts of the world at different times from year to year, there are actually slight fluctuations in the measurements or like coefficient of gravity. Like they're very, very slight and subtle, but they will consistently vary. So it might be that the things that we have taken to be constant aren't actually constant at all. It's just been an assumption. So our understanding of reality might be very flawed, and we might be assuming as a society that we know more than we do. And I think that's where the interdimensional and metaphysical understanding comes in. And I think we might be a little bit afraid of how much validity a lot of these ideas have, like the ideas like the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life and, well, everything else that we talked about today. So I think there's a lot that can be explored here.
Okay.
I want to harp on that point again. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think it's important. Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, and so much of our world's designed to use technology to mystify us. What we should do is use mysticism to understand and command technology, or to communicate, or to relate to it, or whatever it is. But we need to use mysticism at technology, not technology at mysticism, whichever direction that sounds. We need to focus on the Geist more. I have thoughts on Brahma, some of these weird different occult groups, but you know what? Just don't sacrifice people at home, kids. I don't think it's a good idea. All right. Love you guys, and we'll see you
let's
next
wrap
time.
her up, boys.
Peace out. Take
All
care of
right,
yourselves.
much love.